Today, I have the great pleasure and immense honor to speak with a legend when it comes to negotiation. He's been negotiating, he was the head of negotiation for hostage negotiations for the FBI. He's the founder of the Black Swan Group, the author of several books. It is my great pleasure today to speak with the one and only Chris Voss. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meaning podcast. And today I am so honored to speak with my guest. He has written several books. First one that I read was Never Split the Difference. I wrote a book also called The Full Fee Agent, more towards for real estate professional, but a lot of learnings there as well. And most recently, he published Empathy and Understanding in Business. He has been the head of the negotiation team, hostage negotiation for the FBI. He has changed the way people negotiating at the FBI, but also is teaching different business schools. He's the founder and head of the Black Swan Group. I think that at this stage, if you don't know that I'm speaking with Chris Voss, you've been hiding in a cave for the last 20 years. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
It's amazing what you've done in your life. The books you publish, I read it like a novel and I'm learning so much. Until reading your books, I thought that I was a good negotiator and I've been quite successful in business. And I'm thinking, where were you the last 20 years? I could have been even much better. But can you tell us, how did you come to work for the FBI? And what was the passion about negotiation that you've had all your life?
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, the passion I've had all my life has really been to learn. I love learning. I'm very coachable. And I like figuring things out faster, finding ways to get stuff done faster than other people. And, further down the line, when I volunteered on a suicide hotline in New York City to learn how to communicate to become a hostage negotiator, when I found out that empathy got things done faster, I was like, I'm all in. Like, it's very counterintuitive to think that taking the time to make somebody feel heard would actually accelerate the process. But when I first volunteered on the hotline, they told us right from the beginning, like, you got a time limit of 20 minutes on every call. And I remember thinking, like, 20 minutes, that's impossible. In the movies, they talk to people for hours, overnight. I read Richard Branson's book, Losing My Virginity, way back when.
Yeah.
And he talked about talking to people who were suicidal overnight. And I thought, 20 minutes? And they said, no, as a matter of fact, if you do it right, it won't take that long. And when I learned the process, which is empathy, the application of emotional intelligence, the strategic application, the knowing, intentional application of emotional intelligence, and getting people that were suicidal into a better place in 20 minutes or less, I'm like, all right, so this stuff works. This is a way to get stuff done faster in a very counterintuitive way. And it also appealed to me that it was almost invisible. Like, nobody around you knows what you're doing. You're accelerating past everybody else. That's your competition. And ultimately, your competition is yourself. And it's a way to reach new heights in what you can get done at all times. So that was really what my lifelong passion was, how to get stuff done faster, how to do good, if you will. I mean, that's the reason I got into law enforcement in the first place. I wanted something that was very satisfying and did a lot of good. Ideally make some money. You don't get into law enforcement trying to get rich. You want to make a decent living, and it sort of checked off all those boxes for me.
And I must say that all the friends I know in law enforcement are like you, and they want to do good. So, yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the hotline, and I think your former boss, Amy Bondrow, she was running.
You did your homework. Look at that. You even got the names. Well done.
I'm telling you, I really... I'm not playing games. I really love the way the book is written and learning a lot. What I got from it as well, especially that story when you wanted to be the hostage negotiator and she asked you have no experience, no psychology, no this, no that, and say, go and work for a suicide hotline. And actually you did, which nobody had done, although she said that to many people. But there's a story, if you can share that, because for me, it's really telling not only about your humility, but also, as you say, you're coachable because you want to learn. There's the story of the suicide hotline. When you thought that you nailed it, you were very happy, and actually somebody said, this is the worst call I've ever listened to.
Yeah, that illustrates a number of other points. The point I was really trying to make with that is that negotiation skills are perishable. Jim Camp wrote a book called Start With No in 2002-ish, and he called negotiation a human performance event, like performing in a sporting event. And the champions, they don't just perform in the events, they practice constantly. Like on my Instagram feed, Jordan is coming up all the time. Jordan practiced like crazy. He practiced, he rehearsed. Tiger Woods spent more time on a practice courses than he did playing in the tournaments. If the only thing Tiger Woods ever did was play in tournaments, he wouldn't have won them all. So what does that mean? When I was on a hotline, I was doing my volunteering. We were required to do 2 shifts a month. I'm on a hotline 2 shifts a month, doing it constantly, and my skills are eroding. And I don't even realize they're eroding because I'm only doing it and I'm not intentionally practicing on the side. I'm not getting better. I'm not studying it as a sport, as an art, as a performance event. And I think I'm fine, because the skills erode invisibly. And I come up from my annual review and I thought it was a great call. And the person I spoke to on the line at the end of it even congratulated me for having done a great job. And I go back to get reviewed by Jim, the supervisor, and I was really proud of myself. I'm kind of polishing my fingernails pat myself on the back on the way back. And he's like, that was horrible. And I remember saying, you didn't listen to my call. My call was so good that my person in distress actually congratulated me. He says, yeah, let's start with that. That proves that you didn't do a good job, because if you did the work, if you were the success, then they're lost as soon as they get off the phone because they need you. And to be totally successful, they got to feel autonomous. They got to feel like they got there on their own. Even though you guided them, they have to feel it was an achievement of their own. That way they're self-sustaining. And I remember thinking like, wow, like how have I so lost my way? I've been on the line every month. I've done all my shifts. And that was when I really doubled down and started to study it and teach it and practice it and experiment with it in my daily life. That made all the difference in the world.
Being coachable, as you said, and learning, it was also very humbling. So a lot of people that I know would not acknowledge the fact that they don't know or that they can be better, and they will be offended. And one other thing you mentioned in negotiation is it's not the person is in front of you. It's focusing on the outcome and focusing on the conversation, which I think it's absolutely brilliant. When you're talking about the negotiation, you're also mentioning something that I love. It's that whether it's in the office or around the family dinner table, don't avoid honest, clear conflict. And I'm totally in line with that. I'm just wondering, in this day and age where everybody is and anybody is offended by everything and anything, did you see a change in the negotiation and where people want to be politically correct and I'm not going to say this and might offend that person? We're getting nowhere with that. What do you think?
Well, how do you interpret the desire to not offend? If that's trying to tell people the truth in an emotionally intelligent way. We hate people that are blunt, but we love people who are straight shooters. Everybody loves a straight shooter. And what's a straight shooter? A straight shooter is somebody tells you the truth in an emotionally intelligent way. Because of their concern for your feelings, they don't avoid conflict. They take your feelings into consideration when they're honest with you. And intention has a smell, is a phrase that I've heard. My intention is to be candid with you, but in a way that you can hear me, to not harm you by the way I tell you the truth and not harm you by avoiding the truth. And then even if you are a little clumsy, as long as you're intending to respect the other person's feelings and be honest with them, that's kind of the fine line. That's the needle to thread. And if you're offended, even after that, well, that tells me a lot about you. If I'm trying to be honest with you and simultaneously look out for your feelings, if you're still offended, then you were never going to communicate with me. Now I've got your intention. You were just looking to be offended. It didn't matter what I say. Now, there's a category of people there that I also need to know about. They're a minority. They're a small group. And I simply need to avoid you from that point forward. If you will never collaborate with me, ever. And it's a small percentage. Hostage negotiators we had a 93% success rate. What did that mean? 7% of the time, we're never going to make the deal. I think that's probably not a bad number for real life. You know, about 7-ish percentage of the people that you run across, they're never going to agree. They're never going to collaborate. Accept that and move on. Let them be in their own echo chamber because they're in the way of the people that want to collaborate with you. Mm-hmm. And 93%, that's a high percentage. That's not everybody, but most people want to collaborate with you. I'm not interested in being ruled by the 7%. I'm interested in avoiding the 7%.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing I was thinking about is in line with what you say, it is quite challenging to negotiate hostages. I've never done it in my life. I had some tough negotiation in business, but there's something for me that I feel much at ease to negotiate when I'm negotiating a business deal with a client than when it's something personal to me. And I know I'm not the only one. How can I improve that? And it's almost like you're looking at yourself and not being so emotionally involved, which is very difficult for me to do.
It's difficult for everybody. And the real issue is small stakes practice for high stakes results. And when it's personal, you imagine what happens if this goes bad, and you're horrified. And you imagine a lot of negative things. It's your fear center, it's your amygdala. Fear is a liar. And personal negotiations are a little bit trickier because if it's personal, chances are you've had a lot more time to inadvertently wound your counterpart. I think that's the real dilemma of personal life negotiations. The more exposure we've had to anybody, which is sibling or a spouse or a child, the more opportunity we've had to accidentally wound them. So there are wounds there that we don't know anything about. And it hurts the other side even doubly because you don't know. Like you're supposed to be close to them and you hurt them and you didn't even know. So I think that's the real problem with interpersonal negotiations. If that's the case, just simply being forewarned is a little bit being forearmed. Instead of being oblivious to the fact that they're hurt, you can take an emotionally intelligent guess and say, you've probably been hurt. I probably wounded you. Or probably over the years. Begin to recognize it. Empathy is just what's the other side's point of view, period. And then articulate what their point of view is. So if you're forewarned that it's a spouse, sibling, child, or parent, you probably inadvertently wounded them. And simply proceeding from that premise will help make your negotiations more effective, make them easier to navigate.
And I'm listening to you. I'm thinking of a story you mentioned with your son, Brandon, who was laughing because one of your employees was actually using the techniques you teach. He knows you're assertive. He was mirroring what you were saying. So when you've read that, what kind of conversation you have with your sibling or even with your spouse when you're trying to, you disagree on something and then trying to find a solution?
Yeah, well, to me, it's enlightening and hilarious when you find out how much of a human being you are and you're constantly reminded of it. And then it just goes back to intention has a smell. Like my girlfriend, Wendy, currently, we negotiate with each other all the time. But our intention is to collaborate, to have a great long-term trusted relationship where we can really trust each other and we collaborate beyond the horizon. And then what mistakes are you going to make along the way that you don't intend to make? So, yeah, we negotiate with each other all the time. I negotiate with my son, Brandon, all the time. He likes to tease me about my blind spots, and he knows most of them. But the intention is we're still very bonded. We still want to collaborate, still want the best for each other.
Good. I was hesitating to give your books to my daughters, but you convinced me I should do it, so that's okay.
Yeah, well, help them think. Your job as a parent, more than anything else, is equip them with the ability to think because they're going to be out on their own outside the nest eventually.
Absolutely. We always say give them roots and wings, and part of it is self-confidence and being able to stand for what they believe in. Absolutely.
Yeah, amen.
One other thing that you were mentioning is about compromise, and you say no deal is better than a bad deal, and this could apply for business owners in the meetings and event industry as well as for people in the real estate world or any business, as a matter of fact. But could you elaborate that on no deal is better than a bad deal?
Yeah, bad deal is costly long term. It's blood money. It's painful. It makes you regret every step of the way. And if it's bad long term, then you're not going to implement well, and the other side's going to implement well. It's going to cost you way more money than you expected. There's a phrase called elf and half. I borrowed this from my friend Joe Polish, runs Genius Network. And elf is easy, lucrative, fun. Half is hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating. And Joe's philosophy is avoid the halves, work with the elves. So I tell my team, we don't got to make deals with people who are hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating. If you go to work for me, you're going to Chris Voss, hostage negotiator, business negotiator. We got to make every deal. We failed if we didn't make a deal. And I had to tell my people up front, like, no, that is not the case. No deal is better than a bad deal. And let's figure out what the halves look like, the people who are hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating. And let's walk away from them right away. You have my permission to walk away from them immediately. Because if you're looking for the signs, they're there in the first half hour. As soon as you start looking for the profile, it really jumps out at you. Now, my team is a little reluctant to embrace this. So instead of walking away from the halves right away, they start building a profile. What do they say? What do they do? What do they focus on? And then let's track how long it takes to make the deal. And they came back to me and they told me that we've identified the halves. And here's the two issues with the people who are hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating, the bad deals. It takes 2 to 5 times as long from the moment we start the negotiation to the time that we get paid. So what does that mean? That means you just took a 50% cut in pay. Now, also, the halves don't repeat. The people who are hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating, the reality is you're hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating for them. It's a mismatch. It's a bad relationship. And they're not going to repeat business with us, either by their choice or by ours. We'll never make a deal with them again because it was so painful. So not only do you take a 50% cut in pay, but they don't come back ever again. So, what was that blood money for? Theoretically, the blood money means you get repeat business. Well, it's not there. So no deal is better than a bad deal. A bad deal, you take 50% cut in pay, and they're not repeat clients. And that's why you need to walk away from them.
I had an example of when I was back in Belgium with my corporate event agency. There was one particular client was known to just negotiate the percentage for your fee. So low, then one day a friend of mine got it, and he was very happy. And I said, but how you can be happy? It's not sustainable. I said, oh, it's okay. My year is done. I said, really? So next year you're going to go and tell that person that your year is not down, so you're going to go back to a normal fee? It's harder, but actually it's not. For me, it's also the situation where, to what you say, you should not hesitate to fire a client. Is it better for the company?
Agree with you 1,000%. And every head of sales, every head of company that I've ever coached in negotiations, as soon as you start talking about firing clients, they go like, yeah, that's what we haven't been doing. That's what I'm trying to teach our salespeople to do. We make so much more money as soon as we start firing bad clients. But it's a scary thing to do.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. I just want to link to the real estate as well. Not only because my wife was a lawyer in Belgium as a realtor, but she's faced with a situation that I know you're very familiar with the new agreement. So now a realtor that are dealing with the buyer will have to negotiate this part of the fee with the buyer, not with the seller, which is a completely new environment. What are your advices there?
I think it's phenomenal. I think it's something that the real estate agent, residential real estate industry has overlooked for years out of fear. And, the suit with the National Association of Realtors, where it was price fixing and 6% is price fixing. Agents were hardly ever getting 6% anyway. Before the lawsuit, they were compromising their prices. And I think residential real estate agents at full fee are a bargain. In business, if you do your job as a finder, you make the introduction, you shepherd the transaction every step of the way. You make sure that the two sides get along. You help them navigate the bumps and the twists and the turns, and you help them get to where the deal is completed. In business, if you've done all that, that's 10%. Finder's fee, full out, you earn the finder's fee, 10%. So 6% is a bargain. That's ridiculous. So residential real estate agents on either end of the transaction. And then about a long time ago, the first time I was ever in the housing market, when I was told that neither, even my agent as a buyer, did not represent me, because by law, you represent who pays you. And if the seller pays both agents, then absent an agreement, my real estate agent has no fiduciary relationship to me. It's actually 3 against 1, unless there is some sort of a buyer's agreement with the buyer's agent. And when I first heard way back when, oh, wait a minute, if I sign an agreement and I pay my agent as a buyer up front, now they got to protect me? Yeah, I want that. So to me, it's a frightening shift in the industry, which is long overdue.
Mm-hmm.
And agents on both sides of the transaction who do their job are a bargain at full fee. So to me, it's a great opportunity to make more money.
Now, when you look at changing mindset, it's not only for the buyers, the sellers, it's obviously for the realtor themselves. What is the first thing that those realtors should be thinking about when it comes to changing their own mindset? Because they're always complaining that the clients not necessarily appreciate the value of what they're bringing. And sometimes I remember when I had my own corporate event agency, it was the same thing. People think that, yeah, you just show up, everything is ready, the whole thing for 5,000 people, it works very well, there's no problem. They don't appreciate what is being done behind the curtain. How do you change your mindset, and how do you demonstrate in the mind of the client the value that you are bringing?
Well, you start talking with them about the alternatives. And vision drives decision, and it's all in your conversation up front. Mm-hmm. Like, what happens if this is not done well? What have you done in the past? What's motivating you to come to me? I mean, how does coming to me help you? A viable, legitimate discussion is, let's talk about where we are, where you want to be. Let's talk about where you're going to be without my help. That's a fair conversation. You do no one any favors by not helping them see the journey without you. And then they make a conscious choice. What do you want this to look like? I heard a statistic a long time ago, and I should have sourced it. I try to source everything now. But I remember hearing 70% of buy decisions are made based on loss, the avoidance of loss, as opposed to the accomplishment of a gain. I believe that to be true. It reconciles with a number of other things: prospect theory, human nature, how people actually see reality. We're driven more by the avoidance of loss. So here's a conversation. What does this look like without somebody there to guide you? You know, how are you going to climb Mount Everest without a guide? That's a fair conversation, fair to use the F-bomb. But the legitimate conversation of what's going on and what are they faced with? And let them make a conscious choice. What is it about you as the provider of the service that distinguishes you? What it really is, and what clients are really looking for, is the knowledge of the landscape. That's competence. They're also looking to find out whether or not they can trust you. Are you going to gouge them? Are you going to hit them for every last dollar? Are you going to throw them under the bus if it's you or them? Trust and competence. Can they trust you with the outcome? You establish those two things. Notice that you don't have to establish competence by giving your plan, because you could have a plan that's ignorant of the landscape and your plan is no good. If you understand the landscape, then you haven't given away your plan, but you've also demonstrated competence for the task ahead.
And demonstrating competence for the task ahead is really how you build the trust. But you mentioned this concept of tactical empathy, which I love. Can you give an example so that the listener can grasp the concept and actually use it in their negotiation?
Tactical empathy is empathy, which is demonstrating understanding not understanding, but demonstrating understanding through your words. That's feeding back to you how you see things. It's that simple. It isn't any more complicated than that. It's neither agreement nor disagreement. How you might see this is that everybody in my industry grabs with both hands. Now, I'm afraid of that negative thought being in your head, but the tactical aspect of this is informed by neuroscience. You're largely driven by negative emotions because we're wired that way. Our survival mindset, which is what we wake up in the morning, is 75% negative, to use layman's numbers. How I arrive at that number, the neuroscientists will argue, okay, so you're right, but how you get there is wrong. I'm like, okay, that's all right with me. I've had a number of those conversations. I said, yeah, your conclusions are right, but how you get there are all wrong. I'm like, okay. All I need to know is what works. So with the brain being 75% negative, I need to articulate out loud to you a demonstration of understanding of your negative thoughts. And that's not to agree with them. And you might say, you believe that everybody in my position is just there to grab with both hands and to sell you stuff you don't need. What it is instead of denying the negative emotions that based on your experience as a professional, you're aware of, I don't want you to think that everybody in my position is trying to sell you stuff you don't need. That's a denial. The tactical empathy approach is you probably think that everybody in my position is trying to sell you stuff you don't need. The denial to the observation, particularly, it's an emotionally intelligent, educated guess on the negative. That's where the acceleration comes from. If you are 75% driven by negative emotions, if I can deactivate them and earn your trust by showing you I'm not afraid of them, I'm not afraid of how you feel. I'm a straight shooter. I know what people in my industry look like to you. We all look like snake oil salesmen. We all look like used car salesmen. We look like the guy who's rolled into town on a wagon with an elixir that cures everything from insomnia to baldness if you just drink it down. That's what the slick snake oil salesman looks like. And there are a lot of people out there that are selling you stuff that you don't need. Just to say that really builds up trust and confidence in your counterpart. And that's what tactical empathy is. Let's be proactive on what you're probably thinking. Let me lay it out there and show you that I'm not afraid of it.
Another element, which is building on tactical empathy for me, is being in front of the person and face to face. And I know there's a lot of technology today. You can speak remotely, etc. I remember when I was implementing a software company in the US, I had the opportunity to speak with the president of the largest association in the field. And I asked her, can I come to your office and ask some question? And she said, sure, but I live in Denver and I live in Boca Raton. I said, okay, which day? And because I flew there, we were able to build a different relationship. She gave me 3 hours of her time. And too often, I think people are not valuing the aspect of being in person, the face-to-face. How is it impacting negotiation? And do you think that your better success have been in business, obviously not in hostage negotiation, but in business, when you were able to sit in front of the person versus speaking on Zoom, Teams, or Google Meet?
Yeah, there's a lot there that I really like. And the first, which in trust is, are you willing to make the investment to come see me? Are you, that's you could come see me with no guarantees, but you've expended your time and your effort. So you're starting to show me that you value me by putting an investment in up front to start with. I mean, there's a lot to that. If we meet with each other informally, if there's in person, there are informal moments that are extremely valuable. And you go to get a cup of coffee, you get up, you take a break from the table. So there's informal moments in person. What do I advocate? I advocate using all means to communicate. And I think when you just need to let somebody know their value, you go out of their way to come see them. That puts you in a different category. I think that's the main thing. I also think what's missing from both phone calls and Zooms, I think there's an actual energy between human beings. If we're talking to each other on Zoom, you see about as much of me as you see if we're sitting across the table. If we're sitting across the table, you only got about half my body language. That's about what you've got on Zoom. There's a lot of information there, but I'm thoroughly convinced that there's an actual energy that we haven't learned how to measure yet, a connection that exists when we're in person that adds to it. And, I don't know what it is. I know the science isn't there yet, but I'm convinced that there's an actual energy that we feel. And that's what we're really cut off from on Zoom.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned this rule of 7-38-55, if I'm not mistaken. But so when you 7% is your words, 38% is your tone of voice, and 55% is your nonverbal. You don't get that online.
You don't get as much of it.
Okay. Yeah.
It depends upon what you're wired into. If I'm a good listener and I'm well equipped to hear and sense, and not all of us are. A lot of us, our primary senses are vision. Roughly 2/3 of us, roughly a third of us, our primary sense, our first sense, where we gather information from, is our hearing. I know that my first sense is my hearing. So if I get on the phone with you, I can really dial in. I'll close my eyes, I'll listen intently, and I'll get a lot out of your voice. But if your primary sense is your vision, then being on the phone is difficult because you're not gathering data with your eyes. You're not hearing with your eyes. And so then that's where some of the rest of this also runs into play and gives people some difficulties. My big advantage on hearing was, number one, I'm wired for it to begin with. And number two, hostage negotiation was always over the phone with no net, no BATNet, if you will, no best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And when that's how you learn it from the beginning, everything is a lot easier. You never had a net. You never had an alternative. You always listen to the voice. So learning it the hardest way to start off with makes most of the rest of it a lot easier.
And in the negotiation part, there's also something you mentioned about deadlines. Some people would say you should give your deadlines. Other people say you should never give your deadlines. And I remember, without going into politics, but when Kerry was negotiating with Iran, he said, we need to have an agreement by that date. And I have a friend here whose family is originally from Iran, and he started laughing. He told me he just dig his own hole because they're going to start asking for a lot the last week. So do we mention where we have a deadline, and I can see in some case might be helpful or not?
Well, that's a great example. And a lot of it is the idiocy of how you put it out there. And a lot, countries and current governments, we forget and tend to ignore people's history. Iran, the Persians, they're bargainers from way back. I mean, 5,000 years of bargaining, like most of the Middle East. They were bargaining for 4,000 years before the United States even existed. So it was the bargainers, the hagglers, the world-class hagglers. They're going to love if you say something like that, but not only how you said it. Now, the flip side is Kerry could have said, look, here's when I have to have a deal. And in order to get there, here's the process that has to get underway. So, and that process is going to take 6 months, and this is what we got to get done in the following week. So if we can't get this done in the following week, we'll call it off right now because we're never going to get to the deadline. That's a different way to put the pressure on them. It's not, deadlines without process is silly, but deadlines with process, and if I know it's going to take 6 months and I know what has to happen over the next week, I'll say to you, like, here's my deadline. But if we don't get this done in the following week, just let me know. I'll walk away right now because I don't need to wait till March 1st to know we're never making this deal. I'll know next week. And if I'm going to know next week that you're not going to collaborate with me, don't waste my time because I'm going to go to somebody else who is. That kind of changes things. So get out of deadlines and get into process and get into next steps and what happens over the next steps. And that example with Kerry and the Iranians, which, by the way, is why the Iranians took us to the cleaners on that deal. And the U.S. made ridiculously stupid agreements because at that point in time, the Obama administration had such a horrible relationship with the Israeli government. Every American administration comes in, they want to make a Mideast peace deal someplace. Got to make this someplace. And the target has always been between Israel and the Palestinians. Obama gets into the second part of his term. He's not getting along with Netanyahu. That's not going anywhere. They start looking around. Where in the Middle East can we make a deal? Oh, Iran. And so, that was the default choice. Compare that, if you will, to the Abraham Accords that Jared Kushner really,
yeah.
His conversation about that on the Lex Friedman podcast is fascinating. Like, Jared starts quietly meeting with everybody early up front. He starts laying the ground rules for the conversations up front. He calls it first principles. He goes to work on it in a very quiet way from the very beginning with no deadline at all, because he understood process.
Yeah.
And as soon as you understand process and you've got a great low-key way of doing it, you're not negotiating in the papers, you're getting together with people informally, you're letting people be candid with you without it getting out into social media. In my view, the Abraham Accords are the best Mideast peace deal that the United States has made in 200 years.
I can only agree with you 1000%. But now I never looked at it the way you just mentioned, which is great, which is about not only the deadlines, but the process. And that's what makes the whole difference.
Sure.
Talking about cultural differences in business, whether you're dealing with a buyer for your real estate that is coming from abroad, or you have to negotiate, or buying a company with somebody who's not originally from the US like me. One thing I always say, I'm from Belgium. Belgium and the French, we can talk about it for many. But the thing is, if you have somebody on the scale from 1 to 10, if somebody is able to deliver 5, a French person will tell you in general that they're able to deliver 7. And the Belgian, as of always underassuming, will say, we can deliver about 3. Here in America, the guy who owns the 7-Eleven at the corner of the street doesn't have a passport, never been out of Florida, but he has the greatest 7-Eleven in the world. So when you look at those cultural differences, how do you incorporate that into your negotiation toolbox?
Well, it's actually really easy when you accept the definition of empathy, which is, how do you see it? Let me articulate how you see it. Now, when we start to run into problems cross-culturally, it's when we believe that our negotiation approach is the best approach. An American wants to show up and go like, America, damn glad to meet you. Let's get right down to business, partner. Let's not waste any time. Well, that's when you think that your cultural approach is the best. But empathy is about, how do you see it? How do you view it? How do you take the world in? I'm at a business conference I think it was in Germany, 8-10 months ago. Cross-cultural negotiation expert walks up to me and he's saying, yeah, the Germans are different from the French, or different from the Italians. You got to understand each different culture to negotiate. And he can tell from the look on my face that I'm just not buying it. I believe human beings are human. We all have basic human nature wiring, whether you're Chinese, whether you're Belgian, whether you're French, whether you're African. You're still a human being at the base. And finally, he says to me, look, everybody just wants to know that you know where they're coming from. And I'm like, bingo, tactical empathy. That's exactly it. So if I'm talking to a French person or Belgian or whomever, I'm going to want to start taking emotionally educated guesses on how you see things. And a small amount of research on my part will get me started. Like what you just told me just now. That's enough information for me to get started with somebody from Paris or someone from Belgium. And then I'm going to start throwing it out, and I'm going to respect you. I'm going to make my observation in an inquisitive fashion, using that kind of tone of voice. And somebody pointed out to me the other day that I actually turned my head.
Yeah, you did. You actually did.
I will use my body language to help my words land. And if I'm being respectful and genuinely curious, you'll confirm where I'm right. And when I'm wrong, you'll simply guide me into being right. And with that approach, I can get started with pretty much anybody, whether they're Chinese or whether they're French, because I'm respectful, I'm genuinely curious, and I really, really want to understand. And then you'll open up to me.
I love it. Absolutely love it. Now, Chris, I would spend hours conversation talking with you, reading everything you did. By the way, your newsletter today is about that. It's empathy over sympathy, which I think it's a great concept, as you just explained. I want to have one last question, and it's about the future of negotiation and AI.
And then afterwards, is it a ridiculous idea if we talk about the newsletter a little bit more?
The way you state the question, I would say, and how am I supposed to do that? Of course, please. First, let's talk about the newsletter.
Well, I'm really glad that you mentioned it, because the newsletter is complimentary and it's concise and it's actionable, which then what it really is what you just mentioned. It's thought provoking. It's designed to help provoke thoughts in you that will help you today, whether you're negotiating with a spouse or a client or a neighbor or a child, because we're all human beings. Mm-hmm. And the newsletter is really the gateway to everything that the Black Swan Group does. It's the gateway to our website. Our website is a gold mine, and there are a lot of different tunnels to go down in that gold mine to find. Are you looking for emeralds? Are you looking for gold? What do you need? So the website is blackswanltd.com, BlackSwanLtd.com. And as soon as you come in, you get the opportunity to sign up for the newsletter. And also, there's a tab on the upper right-hand corner, I recall, of the web page, where if you hit that tab, you can go to back articles. And if you want to take a deep dive on a topic, then you just start searching through there, negotiating salary, negotiating with a spouse, sympathy versus empathy, for use in all your negotiations. There's a lot there. And then plus all of our announcements come through the newsletter. We're doing a 2-day training in Philly, which is coming up in just a couple of weeks. What do we have that fits you in terms of your time and your budget and your commitment to yourself? How much better do you want to get? You want to get better, we'll take you there. So that's what I love about the newsletter and subscribing to it. It's you give us your email. We'll email it to you. Today's Tuesday. You got it Tuesday morning. Monday's always a hectic day. Tuesday's when we're planting seeds to help you throughout the week. So I love the service that we provide via the newsletter, and it's complimentary.
I have to say two things about this, what you just said now. The first one, you're absolutely right. And I love reading your newsletter. The second one, I'm going to re-listen to what you just said, because this is like the piece of art about speaking about what you're doing, the service you're providing, and basically motivating people to go and look for it. So thank you for doing that, which is
I'm helping.
Which is a perfect segue for me for the last question I would like to ask you in this conversation. And it's linked as well to what you just said and about listening to the needs of people and providing information. You said something that I wrote it down just to make sure that I'm not, distorting the words. When you're talking about knowing their religion, about the people that you're dealing with, you suggest to listen and re-listen to conversations, and also have people that are listening into the conversation that gonna grasp something that you haven't noticed during the conversation. And that got me thinking about all the various AI tools that we have now, where, you go into Zoom, there is always this, I'm not going to mention any brand, but .ai that is taking the notes, that is giving action point and everything. How are you going to incorporate the AI tools in what you do, and how could people should think about it in terms of getting better at negotiation, getting better at business?
I love AI. I didn't understand it for a long time, and somebody once described it to me as AI is like having a really great intern. They give you food for thought. 85% of what you're looking for, it's a Google search. AI is an advanced Google search. It helps get you the answers in a more concise manner. If you Google stuff, if you go on the internet and you search for information on a topic, AI is just the next level of a search, although it brings you back the information a little more concisely, a little more precisely. And then you take in what you get and you use your human brain and your human instinct to assemble it for the last 15%. So I think AI is very helpful as long as you know what it's doing for you. It's not getting you all the way there. It's not giving you the complete answer. It's taking a big chunk of it. It's compiling some great information for you, and then it's putting it in front of you in a very concise manner, and then you make the decision from there. It's it's a little bit like Wikipedia was originally. Wikipedia first came out, and people started writing research papers based only on what they read in Wikipedia. And that was when I was going to Harvard to get my master's. And they said, Wikipedia is not a great source. You can't quote it chapter and verse. Simultaneously, I thought Wikipedia was a good place to get leads. I'd see what they wrote in Wikipedia. I'd check their source. I'd go read the source. And then when I went straight to the source, then I could make my decision. So I used Wikipedia at the time as an assistant researcher, which still needed me to sort through the data at the end of the day and figure out what was good. And AI is the same way.
Wonderful. Chris, when we meet, hopefully in person in a year time, and we have a bottle of champagne to celebrate something, what are we going to celebrate?
That's a great question. How many more people in your audience listen to the podcast conversation with me? It started their journey on tactical empathy with the Black Swan Group. They subscribed to the newsletter. They went to some of our courses. They became great clients, and they're grateful to you for making the introduction. And then they told everybody they knew to listen to your podcast because that was a starting point for them.
Would it be crazy to think that you're going to incorporate this podcast into your newsletter?
I want to tell you something. You got to email the links to us for the podcast. Make sure we get the video. We're actually putting much more video clips out onto the internet now than we ever did before. I hope to increase it by 3,000%. And I'd love for us to put video clips from this interview all over the internet so that people don't miss it.
Wonderful. Chris, thank you so much. I'm so honored you took the time to speak with me today. And again, I learned a lot listening to you. Thank you very much.
Pleasure was mine.
Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I love everything you write and what you talk about. Truly a great honor. And I know that everybody who's been listening, a lot of golden nuggets to implement in their business and in their life. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to connect with me, please follow me on LinkedIn, or you can go on the website, eventbusinessformula.com, where you'll see a lot of information that can help you in your business if you are in the meetings and event industry. And if you learned anything interesting today, please do share with your network. Thank you. Bye-bye.